Hey everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited and also nervous at the same time. Today I'm going to be talking about CLIs, and it's something that I've like a lot of history with CLIs, good and bad. So I'm just going to talk about the journey, and also we're going to do some live coding. But speaking here is hard enough, so we'll see. Okay, so So a little bit about me. So I'm based in the Bay Area. Uh, I'm a staff data scientist at Intuit. I work in the decision science team. I'm also an editor at PyOpenSci, which is a nonprofit for broadening the acceptance of scientific Python packages. I love role-playing games, both in my PS5 and also in my Steam Deck. I also feel that driving is very therapeutic, only if it's a stick shift, though. Okay, so with that, let's get started. Today's agenda is mostly about CLIs, the motivation behind it, and how do we start from the very basic, from the standard library in Python, and then go from pretty difficult to live with to pretty awesome to live with from day to day, right? And then we'll look in the end into some production patterns that would be very useful. Okay, so let's talk about my first CLI experience. Okay, this was the year 2013. I was an undergrad student. I just installed Ubuntu because somebody told me, hey, that's great, we should do it. But I had to do a dual boot because I didn't want to lose my games. And this was my first Python project, and I was learning Git as a CLI. So you can imagine I was really, really pumped. Okay, I was like, I can conquer the world right now, right? So well, this was kind of the project. I did a git status, that's great. I see these cool things, great. Now by mistake, when I typed git commit, I forgot the -m, all right? So in which you can do an inline thing, right? So when I did git commit, I was here. This was the VI editor by default, and to put it bluntly, I just didn't know what to do, okay, here, because it did not give me anything, okay? I typed a bunch of keys, and there was nothing that I could be doing, and in nobody's world and in no multiverse I could have imagined I had to press I for an insert, right? But for some magic, I just did something, and then finally, I was here. Great, right? Now the question is, how do I save and exit? Okay, so after doing a lot of head banging here, I finally figured out, and yeah, it was pretty hard for me, and I would like to say that this is not a dig at VI and Vim. I use it every day, and it's great, but I think that it could be a little bit easier for newcomers to deal with it. So with that, let's talk about why great CLIs matter, right? Because they're fast, they have no overhead. Try loading 1 gigabyte, like a CSV file into Excel versus just doing a tail or a head, right? It is also composable, meaning that you can pipe different like CLI commands together to form something completely different. It's also scriptable, meaning that you can run this in a CI/CD, in your SSH sessions, in different environments. It also can be made universal. By universal, I mean that it is cross-platform only if you make it in such, but it is possible. And finally, there is also now especially it's pretty important that it defines a contract for the agent, okay? So instead of just having a bunch of MD files that you just pray that the agent uses and follows them like properly, you can actually have a proper contract with a proper help command, some JSON piping output, some proper exit codes, and et cetera. So that would make your system much more deterministic, okay? So let's talk about our running example. Now, this is not that important, meaning the concept and the domain is not that important, but still, this is something that I've been playing with, which is a tool to monitor ML model explainability, okay? So the idea is to just capture, as the model runs in production, capture, which features drive the predictions, and also, compare the explanations from, let's say, from different model versions, from different time periods, et cetera, okay? So let's just imagine that we are just thinking about 3 commands, One is a log, which is just logging the explanation values for a batch of predictions. So imagine that you have a data, you have a model, a trained model, and then you just want to log the explanation values, okay? Then you also have this report command, which generates the summary of those explanations that have been there, right? And also, some drift reports. So did the model change? Did the explanations change? Things like that. And finally, we have a watch, which is a live monitoring dashboard, okay? Really, no ML background is needed here. Just think of it as a system or a pipeline that just logs data, analyzes data, and then watch the data live, all right? So what do we want from our CLI? I think this is where we need to set some clear definitions of what separates a good CLI versus a great CLI, okay? Number one, it has to be distributable in a virtual environment and also globally, meaning that if you're working on a library project, you can install it in a VNV, but also install globally as well. It should support subcommands. By subcommands, I mean you might want to group different subcommands together into one parent command because they actually follow that logical flow. You also want some type-safe inputs, meaning that you want to fail faster if something is gone wrong in your inputs. You don't want something weird happening at the end of it. You also want some kind of a config hierarchy, which I'm going to talk about later on. And you also don't want to follow blind, right? Meaning that you want to have some kind of a feedback from the CLI that something is happening behind the scenes if there is more time taken for a particular command. It has to be fast, meaning that things like the help command and other things, it should be fast. Okay, you should feel that, okay, this is pretty good. And it also should have good defaults. By good defaults, I mean there are different kinds of people who will interact with our CLI. Some people will be lazy. They don't want to put too many commands, right? So good defaults are a great starting point for them. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to make this into a command. By command, I mean that's something that you don't have to do a Python -m or something. So the name of our package is shapmonitor, and what I'm doing here is in my pyproject.toml file, I just created this script to make this, make sure that this is a command there. So I mean, this is the first step that we need to do. Now let's talk about the first thing that we all do when we try to create some scripts or some CLI out of our Python code, right? So this is the argparse. And it works pretty well. The only problem is that it's pretty verbose, meaning that you don't have to read through all of this, but just understand that in order to do something, you have to write a lot of things. You have to add the parser, you have to add each argument, you have to specify what these are for, of course, and the most critical part is that you have to do some manual validation. For example, does the path exist in that data directory? Or some kind of validation for some kind of a floating value as well. So this is a lot of work. But we do get a lot of good things built in. For example, when I do shapmonitor log and do a help command, I do get the usage descriptions of, it actually tells me what I need to do, okay? Granted, it doesn't look that pretty, but it still gets me, some information here, right? So for example, the log command will look something like this. So I do a log, so I give it the data, I give the model, I give the data directory or the output directory, and then it can just say, okay, logged 100 samples, right? And similarly, the report summary command. So it can also do nested subcommands as well that we talked about. So here, for example, I'm going to do the shapmonitor report summary and then give the data directory, and then we have this great table. So I mean, it looks nice because it's formatted and you understand what's going on, but we can do better. And we know what the pain points are here, right? So the main one is on the input side, which is there is a verbose argument definitions. And you can imagine that these CLI modules can go bigger, right? There is a lot of manual validation that you have to do. There is no config hierarchy built in, and there is only text-only output, meaning you just get the normal text. You don't get anything richer than that. So now I'll just go over the typer and rich here, okay? And these are, some of the packages that I've been working and using a lot in my day-to-day work, and these are just awesome. And these are not competing with each other; these are actually complementary to each other. So the way I think of typer is on the input side. So basically, if you are the engineer and you are the developer, so it makes your life easier, okay? And rich is actually better for the users who are using your tool, all right? So let's look at the input section first. So that same log command, we can actually narrow it down into a declarative approach. By declarative, meaning that you define how do you want your end state to be, okay? You don't have to worry about the process. So here you can see that type hints are so crucial here because they actually build the foundation of whatever is going on here. So you see in line number 7, you have this argument, which is basically the required argument. But it also has these things, and for example, exists equals true, it actually does that check automatically whether this data path actually exists and is it readable, all right? Similarly, in line number 8, you can also add some kind of a shorthand notation. So instead of dash dash model, you can do -m. And then finally on line number 11, you can actually define some environment variables to override. And this is what I was talking about, the config hierarchy. So we'll actually go into that later on, but it actually provides different paths for a user to interact with this variable, okay? They can use the default, they can override using an environment variable, and this is very important in, let's say, inside a Docker container or something, okay? And even in the sample rate at line number 12, you can see that you have this built-in validation for a floating point value, which, from 0 to 1, for example, okay? And similarly, we can actually do the subcommands very easily. So report app is the parent command here, okay? And what you're doing is you are just linking that parent command to its child commands, which is here the summary and thrift, all right? So yeah, pretty straightforward. And one good thing is that Typer has some good defaults, and some of these good defaults really make your life easier. So for example, no args is help is true. It basically means that your CLI, you don't have to mention --help all the time. So if you can just do, just say SHAP monitor, for example. I'll show you in the live demo, but it just makes your life easier. You don't have to do that all the time, okay? And then the rich markup mode just makes sure that the styled help output comes into play as well. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the output side of things, which is the enhanced output in rich, right? So it just makes our life better in a terminal. So it provides us with progress bars for so that you're not just staring at the screen and don't know what's going on. You also have some different kinds of tables to actually make things visually more attractive and just understand the data more quickly of what is going on. Simple things like colored text and some bars and everything. We'll just look into that. But that just gives you a better understanding of what is going on behind the scenes. You don't have to really squint through the whole data there. Okay. So with that, let's look into some here. Okay. So I have my yeah. Better? Is it visible? Okay. So when I do help, so I get all of this information, and this is much better than the help that I got in argparse, for example. Okay. So now what I was talking about before, that if you just do SHAP monitor, I get the same thing. That's because I defined that variable that if no args is provided, then you just show the help as well. Now, there are a couple of things that comes built in. For example, the version and the install completion. So it just makes your life easier in the terminal, okay? So now let's look into log, what log is all about, right? So you can see that it takes a lot of information. For example, it takes data, and then you can specify the model and all of that. All of these colors are, by the way, configurable, so you can do that. But let's just see something that goes around. So let's do log, right? So I'll give the data path. So let's do this data path, and then model, and let's do a sample rate of 0.4. Okay, and it's going to just do that, and this, what you see, is a panel. A panel just summarizes the information in a boxed output that makes it easier for us to understand what really went on there. Okay. Similarly, let's now look into the other commands, right? So if I just do sharp monitor, you can see that I also have report. So let's do sharp monitor, report, and if I just don't do anything, I know that these are the subcommands that I can just look into. So I can do monitor, report, summary, right? And then see what that is all about. And you can see that I can specify some period of time that I want this to be. So let's say I do period, and I just want to look through last 5 hour to last 2 hour. Okay, this kind of notation is analogous to git diff if you've used that, right? So, and you can see these kind of bars that you can design in your table output. It just makes your life much easier to understand the proportionality of these values, right? And it's just good to see as well. So similarly, what I can do is now I can go into report. Sorry, my bad. Report, and then let's do drift. So here you can see that I need to provide some reference and the current time periods, right? So let's just say that I want a reference time period of last, let's do last 35 days, because I've been running this, and then the current time period is last 5 hour to now. And you can see that here as well, I get something which is visually, it gives me much more information than what it is out there, right? So I get this panel, which gives me a summary, and it also gives me a lot of visual cues on this, right? Red, yellow, and green there, okay? With that, so how did we do that? First of all, there are some status indicators that Rich provides. So you have the spinners and everything, text column. You don't need to worry about that. They have that in the documentation. It's just the rule of thumb for me is that transient spinners for intermediate work when you don't know how much time it will take, and then progress bars when you know the total. Okay, and then the visual weights that we saw, it's basically very simple. So what you do is you define this rich table, and then you add these columns, and then you calculate this bar, which is proportional to a certain value. So in this case, it was proportional to, let's say, the PSI value here, right? Or the mean sharp value here. No, the mean ABS value here, so at line number 12. And that's what was going on. And then you could design like HTML tags for these colors, which makes your life much easier there. All right, so that's what makes this possible there. And then you also have some styled statuses and panels that we saw where some text are colored, so all you need to do is basically create these Boolean flags, and you define these thresholds based upon your metric. And after you do that, you can have something like this, right? That we saw. So with that, now we can come into an interactive, interactive TUI or terminal user interfaces. So this library is called Textual, and it's really good if you want something live monitoring. Now, I would not recommend this for every application because it slows things down a little bit, and this makes things a little bit complicated as well. So if you need live monitoring, you need explorations, you need some keyboard-driven workflows, then it just gives you that, all right? So things like this, so the app structure looks very similar here, or basically it gives you an app, it gives you widgets, and then you can define the layout. I'm using CSS as well. So let's look, how does that look like? So let's do sharp monitor, watch, help, right? So we have this. Great, so it's basically similar. And it's also very important for your, all of your commands to have, consistent options, okay? You don't want different commands to have different kinds of options if they're doing the same thing. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So if I just do a period of last, again, 30 day to now, okay, so you can see something like this, right? So this is very simple, and this is for just to demonstrate what we can do. But you can define all of this. And this is, by the way, refreshing every 5 seconds. So you can have an auto refresh as well. And then you can filter out with different features. For example, if I just want to type out, yeah, that ratio and all of that, you can do that. And then it also comes with different commands which you can actually bind. So you can see that these commands, for example, you can define, and this can be your proper terminal-based application. There are actually many examples of this, and that's pretty good. All right. So great. So with that, and this is how the auto refresh is happening. You don't need to worry about that too much, but the most important thing is that you mount your data once. So it gives you a lot of hooks. So I mean, like Textual gives you a lot of hooks in which you can auto refresh, and so you mount the data once, and then all of the other things happen subsequently. So you don't have to mount the whole data again and again. So that makes your life a lot easier as well. Okay, now let's talk about some of the production patterns, and this is very important, I feel. And in my in my experience, this is what separates really good CLIs with something just normal. Okay, the first thing is composability. So your CLI should be able to play well with other CLI tools or other really famous and well-used CLI tools like JQ and Xargs. Okay, and the only one thing you can do for that is make sure you have a JSON output. Because when you have something like that, it is very easy to pipe, and it's also much easier for an agent to read that. So let's say you're building some kind of a skill file, or let's say a plugin, make sure to tell the agent or specify to always use a JSON flag, because it doesn't matter all of this rich outputs, it doesn't matter for the agents. Okay. Imports are really, really expensive for a CLI application, and this is, by my personal experience, I can tell you that, because in a service or in a notebook, it does not matter, right? Like how much time your imports are taking, it does not really matter. But for a CLI, it really does matter. Like in this case, for example, in this init file, you can see that I'm actually importing the whole SHAP monitor, and it's a scientific Python package. So you can imagine that it's actually importing a lot of heavy dependencies. So when you do something like SHAP monitor help, it will take a lot of time. And it's really bad. Okay, we don't want that. So actually, I can show you what I mean. So if I do time SHAP monitor help, you can see that it takes about less than 0.2 seconds there, right? So less than 200 milliseconds. But I have something else which I ran this in argparse, and if I do this monitor, you see that it's taking a lot of time, right? And the reason it's doing that is because it's not optimized for these imports, okay? So that was just a brief demonstration there. So what can you do? Well, you can do a couple of things. One of them is not so pretty, which is the local imports. I sometimes use them, but I use them only when there is no other way, because it just doesn't look pretty that much. Then you also have the lazy loader library, which is pretty good. And then you can also use the type checking. You should use the type checking for expensive type hints, especially for scientific Python packages or in other packages, right? Or you can just chill out and wait for Python 3.15, where we'll have this sorted out, right? Well, one more thing you could do, and actually this is thanks to PEP 562, is that, and not many people know about this, but you can define a module level getAttrs dunder method that just helps you make these imports better. So what I did here is that's the same init file, and then I added a getAttr dunder method where I'm importing my module only when it is called for. So import SHAP monitor, for example, it just loads the module shell. It does not do anything. It's very fast. So your help is very fast, okay? But when you do SHAP monitor, import SHAP monitor, which is you're importing some module, right? Then it triggers the dependency loading, and that can be slower, which is okay, because you are actually intentionally trying to do that. Distribution is very important. This is not like a normal library where people do pip install. Actually, it is very few people who will use it that way. Mostly, you want it to be installed in a global way, right? All of these libraries or all of these CLI tools, which are non-Python and Python, they are actually installable through a global way. So a pipx or a UVX is very good. If you really want to go even further, you can also do brew. But yeah, that's up to you. But definitely pipx or UVX for sure. Okay, and now about config hierarchy. So, sometimes what you need is some kind of an override that you need, right? So you have flags, you have environment variables, and you have defaults, right? So here in this case, for example, when I define a flag, when I say dash dash data directory is this, I'm specifically saying that use this. That should work in the first priority, okay? The second one is the environment method, right? So the environment variable, so let's say in a Docker container, I would not use this, but something inside a container, it's really useful because you want some specific place. So there, this really helps. And that is the second priority. And the third one is that when you don't provide anything, it just goes with the default there, all right? So it gives us 3 config layers. Now, speaking of config, you need to understand that your CLI can have 3 different categories of files, okay? It can have the config, it can have the data, depending on the CLI, not necessarily, and it can also have a cache, okay, which is these regeneratable files. Now, Linux describes this XDG-based directory spec, which is great, and that just works, okay? So you can define your config here, your data in local share, and your cache in cache, okay? And that works really well. So if you have these things, it really works. But obviously, you also need to do it cross-platform. If you need to do it cross-platform, a great way to do it is using the platform directory, okay? The platform does package. And it is, by the way, used by Black, Poetry, and Talk. So what it happens is, behind the scenes, detects your OS environment, and then your config directory and data directory and your cache directory becomes something else. So in Linux, it becomes the same XDG framework, and in Mac OS, it's library preferences, and then your app. And in Windows, of course, you have your own as well. So in the end, when to reach out for what? So if you just have a plain Python script, which nobody is using much, use argparse, okay? If it's very, very simple, it's not worth the complexity, so just use that. If you're going ahead in complexity and more people are using it, use Typer because you need to scale your code there, right? And if you want readable structured output, use Rich. Then again, you use Rich for progress bars and everything. And then finally, if you really need a full TUI application, then you use Textual there. Of course, we are standing on the shoulders of these great libraries. So thanks to them as well. And this is, I don't know, how many people recognize this, but this room and this, conference place reminds me of Last of Us, and this, theater stage. So yeah, I feel really grateful there. So, thank you. I'm open to questions, and I'll be there outside as well.
Hello. I was wondering, because we have some of these command line tools all around our office. What would it take to, I'm trying to understand what it would take to port over to this more TUI, right? And some of those objectives of those command line interfaces are flashing hardware, giving some kind of downloading requirements and things like that. So are there any built-in widgets to support or temporarily provide a window into what other processes are doing or within the TUI itself?
Interesting. I feel there's a play there. You could actually do something. I would not go the TUI route right away.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
I would actually go with something stateless. If you can, we know that there are many CLI commands or CLI tools which can interface with Docker or containers as well, right? So if you're looking something along those lines, all you need to make sure is that you have a mechanism to interface with it, right? So whatever network you're in or whatever layering or mesh you have, okay, if it's able to interact with it and go past that, I think that is a win there.
Okay. Yeah. I just didn't know if there was a widget that within the TUI frame you could say a child process is running within it. Here is the output. Here is what it's doing. It's done, and then change that TUI widget or area on your screen, something like that. So.
Yeah, I think you could do it. I think I'm not 100% sure because I've not come across that use case there, but I think that's a great question, and you could look into it. I feel there's a play there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for the talk.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a quick question. Do you know if there's any packages out there that might make just starting one of the CLIs just much easier? instead of like having to figure out how to write from scratch, like kind of like a template that you can just in and generate like boiler template code for you?
I feel Typer has really good documentation. You know, if you go into Typer, I think Typer has really good examples as well to get started with. And I mean, that's the beauty of these tools, is that they are very easy. And I mean, I don't know if you know about this library called Click. It was actually the original library, which was using, you know, all of these, you know, CLI and making things easier. And Typer is actually built on top of Click. So it makes your life even further better.
Hey, that was a great talk. Thank you. For an application, for a command line application that's going to connect to a network service and kind of monitor things with WebSockets or something, are there mechanisms in Textual to be able to kind of async wait on a socket? I saw your example of just refreshing on a timer every once in a while. Does it have more I/O interaction?
Yeah, it could do that. You could do that. Yeah, yeah. So everything in Textual is actually async. So internally, all of these widgets, all of these things are actually async. So yeah.
I know, about what you said about the JSON output, I'm just wondering, the TUIs are for humans, right? Can the agent use a TUI?
No,
Or
unfortunately,
it should
no.
not, but
No, it should not. It
okay.
should, it's not about it should not, it cannot.
It cannot, okay.
Yeah, it cannot, because it requires some interaction, right? So if you can imagine, why does, you know, apt-get has a -y command, okay? So that's because you want to override that question that comes, that do you want to install it, right? So if you ask the agent, just do, you know, sudo apt-get without using the -y, it will not be able to do that. So that's the reason. So it needs no interaction for the agent to run.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. I had a quick question. You were mentioning Typer, Click, which are, you know, one of the most used. I've come across a couple of things like CycloPTS and the Charm Bracelet editor, which provides things like GUM and other tools. Is there new, you know, open source framework that you tried, or?
Yeah, there are newer frameworks actually, which are great. But the problem is that many of them don't have a tight integration with Rich. Okay, that's what I've like seen, is that so when you install Typer, it automatically installs Rich. Actually, if you don't want Rich, you have to say something like Typer Slim or something. Okay, so and I like Rich. I like that output because it just makes it easier to work with. Okay, rather than just seeing a blob of text. So until they make their own version of Rich, maybe, or maybe use a better integration with Rich, I think Typer is still the best starting point, I would say.
I mean, I personally use, I don't want to do any advertisement, but personally use CycloPTS, which seems to be, I know, very actively maintained right now. And
Okay.
it also supports Rich as a, you know, sublayer.
Okay, that's great. That's great.
And
yeah.
I think the exception too are, you know, Rich printed, but also very nicely done. I mean, I suggest you should maybe look at this one.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I will. Thank you.